You're listening to Radio Free Radio. You've just heard an excerpt from Daniel Thomas Davis's chamber opera, SIX.TWENTY.OUTRAGEOUS, a Radio Free Stein collaboration with American Opera Projects that premiered at Symphony Space in New York City in February of 2018. The excerpt was from Act 1 of that opera based on Gertrude Stein's play, Photograph, and you'll be hearing more from it very soon. Hi, I'm Adam Frank, and welcome to the last episode of this edition of Radio Free Radio. For the last 6 weeks, I've been introducing you to Radio Free Stein's musical renderings of various Gertrude Stein plays. If you would like to listen to previous episodes, you can find links at the project website. That's radiofreestein.com/plays/broadcasts. The recordings on the website were made possible by an Insight grant from the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada. Thanks to the Council, as well as to the Public Humanities Hub at the University of British Columbia for supporting this broadcast. Today, I'm pleased to be speaking with New York-based composer Dan Davis. As usual, before I introduce Dan, or the composer, I want to say a few words about the Stein plays we worked on together. If you want to get a sense of Stein's writing as I talk about these plays, please click on the link at the bottom of the YouTube broadcast page that you're on. For Photograph, you may have to increase the size of the image to make it more legible. Initially, Dan and I were going to concentrate on Stein's Photograph, a play in 5 acts written in 1920. Several of her early plays remark on photography as if there's some particular connection between the stage, the page, and photographic reproduction. For example, in the final act of Stein's first play, What Happened, you may have heard that if you tuned into the episode with Samuel Vriezen a few weeks ago, we hear this question: what is a photograph? A photograph is a sight, and a sight is always a sight of something. These plays reflect on their own status as potentially seen, framed, or staged. Consider the etymological roots of the word theater from ancient Greek, a place for viewing or seeing. Plays are beheld, like photographs. But for Stein and other modernist writers, along with this analogy between theater and photography comes competition or rivalry. In the first lines of Photograph, we hear that photographs are small, they reproduce well, I enlarge better. Precisely because photographs are small and reproducible that they can be disseminated so widely and accrue what Walter Benjamin famously called exhibition value. Stein's play acknowledges photography's remarkable exhibition value, but insists on its own greater capacity to contain, to represent groups back to themselves in performance. At the first workshop we held on Photograph at Emory University in 2014, one of the participants and organizers, Michael Moon, reported that, to him, the play had more the feel of a monologue than a dialogue, despite the conversational markers. He brought up the idea of subvocalization, the phenomenon of speaking to oneself at the threshold of consciousness that I've talked about on previous episodes. We were prompted by this idea to divide the first few lines of the play between a more extroverted voice, V, and a quieter sub-voice, SV, that elaborates, undermines, or otherwise revises the first voice's lines. And then we began to hear a third voice, with the lines that follow Now We Sing in the prologue as 3 short songs. These were St. Cloud and You, St. Cloud and Loud, I Sing, You Sing, birthday songs, and Oh Come and Believe Me. Dan Davis immediately began thinking of ways to interweave 3 individual songs or melodies as sung by 3 distinct voices. I want to play what eventually turned into the beginning of Photograph in Dan's setting, and the three main voices who we renamed V, Me, and Three. The singers, in their order of appearance, are Andrew Fuchs, Ariadne Greif, and Jacqueline Horner-Kwajatek.
Photograph. A parlour play by the name of Photograph, in which a couple and their cousin put on a parlour play by the name of Photograph.
That was an excerpt from, as you would guess, Gertrude Stein's play Photograph, as composed, set to music by Daniel Thomas Davis for 6:20 Outrageous. So I'd like to introduce Dan now. Composer Daniel Thomas Davis's wide range of musical activities has taken him from the stages of Carnegie Hall and the Royal Opera House to monasteries in the Horn of Africa to directing new music festivals in the rural South. He is fascinated by the intricacies and idiosyncrasies of the human voice, and has studied ethnomusicology and several East African vocal string traditions, primarily with master artists in Ethiopia and Eritrea. He's currently a music professor at Binghamton University. Welcome, Dan.
Hi, Adam. Thanks so much for having me. What a joy.
Yes, very happy to have you here in Zoom land. It was quite a wild ride to get from that initial workshop in 2014 to the composition and eventually performance. Almost exactly 4 years later, it's exactly 4 years I remember because it was my birthday in 2014 and then again in 2018 at the show in New York. So I want to start from the very beginning. What drew you to want to work with Stein's writing, Stein's playwriting?
Sure. Where does one even start here? Maybe I'll start with the sonic surface, because I think there really is. There's a reason that generations of composers keep coming back to these words and pseudo words and pseudo sentences and fragments. So yeah, there's the sonic invitation that's just utterly captivating for so many of us working in sound. Which I could nerd on about that forever, but I think there's obviously certainly something to do with repetition here, and the invitations of musical repetition. The line in Captain Walter Arnold, which we'll hear later, I believe, about by twice repeating you change the meaning, which if you're a composer like me is kind of your bread and butter. So when that's so baked into the sonic surface of the language, it's pretty hard to resist. I think beyond that, I think there's this question of finding space in Stein for musical encounters. I often think I work a lot with text and a lot with singing voices and in various parameters and genres and traditions and whatnot. And whenever I'm approaching a text, I think I may love this, but there may be no room for me here. So I say this to my students too, like, oh, I really love this poem. Well, then don't touch it. Right? It doesn't need you. And I'm not saying that Stein she doesn't. I mean, it's less about need in the sense, but more about invitation, right? So there is space to do cool stuff, right?
Yeah, if I could just, Virgil Thompson actually says at some point, he says it's not that Stein's words need music, but that they like music.
That's right. Yep. And I think if you're me and you're also dramatically inclined, I've for a number of years been making dramatic work with texts that are not at least explicitly plays, right? At least not straight plays. And that I would also say Stein's plays are, as we know, not straight plays in any sense of that phrase. I love the puzzle making part of that, right? There's sort of this room for another dramatic intervention somehow. Regardless of intention in a sense. And I find that here. And I guess the last thing I would say to that, and this is sort of on a more kind of cultural level, that, Stein's this kind of proto-queer punk modernist godparent figure. I kind of just, she's of course on some level insufferable, and in other ways I just wanted to hang out with Stein for a while. Right.
Yeah, we certainly got a chance to hang out with Stein's words for a very long time, and it was a kind of an amazing process. Let me just ask you, so why opera actually in the end? How did we end up getting there? Because we initially thought, okay, maybe it'll be like one play, and then there'll be a treatment that more like a musical setting of some kind, and then it evolved, and it gradually evolved into something really like 3 plays and a chamber opera.
Yeah, I mean, we tried not to.
That's true.
But then you try stopping, right? I mean, it was sort of organic in a way, but I think what started happening is that once you start excavating or imagining or overlaying voices that become characters, they start to take on a life of their own, right? And I think this is part of the subjectivity, this sort of nested doll subjectivity of Stein. And then we started talking about more plays, and then you kind of realize that they're all sort of populated by the same voices, and they're kind of Gertrude and kind of Alice, and kind of not Gertrude and not kind of Alice, and not the rest of the world, but also kind of the rest of the world. And so I think something started to happen, despite our best judgment, in which these things all started to contribute to one another, and it was through a sort of collection or assembly of these that it started to it emerged as something else.
Yeah.
Something operatic. We call it, like 3 plays in the shape of an opera, right? Just the best I could do, I guess, with this stuff. So
yeah, though the shape, I think you're completely right. What you're describing is what I like to call Stein's compositional poetics, where there's a quasi representational, quasi just real life integration of, there's bits and pieces of conversation that might have taken place. There's bits and pieces of characterization, but a voice isn't necessarily always a character, or sometimes more, sometimes less. And I think that you're right. Over the course of several plays, these things kind of emerge. They take shape. And that contributed to our desire to set these plays in a parlor, right?
Yeah.
It seemed to be an important setting for photograph, and then eventually for the other plays as well.
But with a different context for each of those, what we eventually called acts, act 1, act 2, which is very short, and act 3. So it's the same parlor, which is the parlor, the home of thee and me, but also, which is sort of Gertrude and sort of Alice and sort of not and sort of all of us, but with different scenarios, right? Different prompts, right?
Yes, exactly. And the prop seemed to be the significant aspect to differentiate the acts from one another. So
That's
the
right.
prop in the first one was this phonograph or gramophone, right? We wanted to thematize recording, sound registration, something like an analogy with photograph, but with just one letter changed. And Doug Fitch, who was the opera's director and set designer, who I'm hoping we'll talk to later, and we'll see whether that happens, came up with an outsized gramophone with a hand crank that actually turned. But that came after, the fact that your score had some pre-recorded elements in it.
Absolutely.
Can you say a word or two about that?
Sure. Well, I remember how we even arrived at this. We were talking, we're dealing with musical sound, but this thing's called photograph, right? And of course, the wordplay is inevitable from photograph to phonograph. That's not a far leap. And it's also a preoccupation of mine, frankly, is the layering of the same voice pre-recorded with a live voice, right? So this sort of encounter with self in time. So most of what we hear, almost all of actually what we hear that's pre-recorded, certainly that comes from the phonograph, is music that's been recorded earlier in time, obviously, not in the performance itself, and actually signified to be even far older through hisses and scratches and other sound effects, but it's from the performers themselves, from the characters on stage, right? So there's an action on top of this pre-recorded sound, and that I find quite appealing just on a sonic level, but it also, there's a sort of Steinian component to that, I think, where you were talking about the line about sight, and sight is always a sight of something, and in a way the recording is not a sight but a time. It's a spot or a patch of time that then asks for some kind of encounter in something closer to the present.
Yeah, like a recreation.
Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah. Let's give listeners a sense of what it is that you're describing here. And let me just say a word about the clip that we're about to listen to. In the program notes for the opera, we introduced the play this way. An oddball couple and their cousin/housekeeper try to stage a parlor play with a group of friends. The friends are the musicians, that's pianist and string quartet, and the parlor play within a play is itself called Photograph, as you heard from the introduction. So we're going to listen to the next clip from Act 1, after the players settle down and actually start the performance. It's about 7 minutes long. You can find it on the second page of the text if you're following along. The musicians you'll be hearing include Dimitri Dover on piano and the Momenta Quartet. That's Emily Ann Gendron on violin, Alex Shiozaki on violin, Stephanie Griffin on viola, and Michael Haas on cello. The musical director is David Bloom, and the sound engineer was Ben Manley.
And the subtitle tree. Act 1, afternoon scene. seen. Was born in America.
She had one goddaughter,
Mrs. Roberts.
a language tongues, a language tongues.
No, indeed, this is not what I meant to say, for this does not describe my feeling. My feeling is that one comes more frequently than another, and yet they always come together. This is not exactly so. They do come together, but some come more frequently than others.
More frequently.
And we like to see them all.
We like to see them all.
Great. That's such a moving piece. And also, so there's something so kind of funny and satisfying going on after the whole kind of America sequence, where the Gertrude character V undermines everything, or sort of slightly undermines it. It makes it go in a different direction by saying it's not exactly how I feel. It's not exactly my meaning.
I didn't mean to say that.
I didn't mean exactly to say that.
What did I mean not to say that? Right.
Right. So tell me a little bit about what's going on there. I mean, I know there's some stage action, which of course the listener isn't able to see, which is the designer Doug Fitch designed this sort of boat, this cutout boat that the announcer kind of drags across on the base of the stage to kind of thematize some immigration, some travels across the Atlantic. Can you say something about how this all kind of worked itself out?
No, absolutely. Like, you know, I wanted this moment to be the. We already have it. Well, let me back up. We already have this parlor play within what is now Act One of an opera, right? But there are these pre-recorded songs or numbers like this one that you just heard on the phonograph that I imagine being really kind of the incidental music to either a shadow play or a puppet play or something within that parlor play, right? And so in this case, we get this shadow play reenactment of transatlantic immigration, really, with this boat of immigrants that we want to see them all. And in a way, there's also there's a little bit of a setup here for Act 3, which we don't know yet is going to happen, but Act 3 is based on the work Psychology of Nations, and we chose to dramatize that as a American presidential election night party that goes absolutely and horribly wrong. I will say that we did decide on that before November of 2016, but it took on new significance after that. But there is a nod to that here, yes. And of course that's in Stein too. This I don't even know what adjective to put here. I'll just say sort of cheeky and undermining relationship to Americanness, right? I mean, I think that is fascinating and resonant and complicated in a lot of ways.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and I think that thematizing this by way of the pre-recording and kind of have that sort of nostalgic, scratchy sound of the old recording, which we wanted to both accommodate, you know, that nostalgia. We talked quite a bit about this. We wanted to kind of register that nostalgia, especially photography in the 19th century is really entwined within a discourse of preservation and revelation, basically the sentimentalizing understanding of photography and maybe sound recording to a certain degree as well, although it's later and it's more tied up with somewhat different access. But I think we wanted to accommodate that nostalgia, but then also get some distance from it. And I think that's partly what's going on, that you managed to do really well with that sequence there.
No, that's right. And the other thing that I think is appealing about the dramatization of recorded sound is, and maybe it's a cheap way of doing this, but it is certainly can feel like an efficient way of getting at the tensions between private and public spaces. So this is all a domestic interior, and yet the phonograph is sort of bringing in that which isn't seen, but is from the external, the outside world, even if it's actually, in this case, are literally the voices of the people on stage.
Right. Yes, and that becomes even more to the point in the third act in our adaptation of the Psychology of Nations, which has a second title, which is "Or What Are You Looking At?" Where instead of a phonograph that's on the stage, we have a radio. And then there's a new character who we've actually already met. The audience has already been introduced to this narrator character who you've heard. And then he becomes we, the voice of the radio. And we dramatize the interaction between the we character and the other members of the parlor in a rather violent and dramatic interaction. So, but that's later, which we won't be listening to in this episode. But I'll encourage anyone who wants to listen. All of these recordings are available on the project website, so please check them out if you wish to hear them. Let's see. I wanted to say a word more about the Americanness part of it, because you made a, there's a choice in the second act, and what's Act 2 in Photograph, but is actually just Scene 2 in this in this act, to kind of actually do a warped and kind of totally destabilized version of the Star Spangled Banner, which is a very bold, and it fit very well with what we were up to. But I think it catches people by surprise when they're listening to it.
Hope so.
So yeah. Is there anything more to say about that at this point, or just pointing people to listen to it?
Sure. I mean, it's interesting just also in terms of Stein's text, right? So she indicates Star Spangled Banner, but without any instruction as to what it might invite here, right? Is it something that is simply spoken? Is it something that's thought internally? I mean, I chose to externalize it in a sort of pretty tawdry way, I would say, or at least disruptive way,
yeah.
Right? Which really kind of derails Scene 2, or the second act of Photograph. They can't go on after that happens.
No, it has to turn to something else, which is the photograph itself that Doug had designed with a number of cutouts, which then get placed on the floor with these glowing eggs. Well, there's of course much more to say about Photograph, and I'm trying to write about it in some critical writing that I'm doing that comes out of this staging that we did. But let's leave it aside, because I think I want to give listeners a chance to hear more of the opera itself. Sure. So I want to turn now to the musical setting for Act 2 of the opera, which was Captain Walter Arnold. That's another early play written in 1916. And in the opera, the setting is once again the parlor. It begins with Three, who is played by, as I said before, Ariadne Greif, wearing a French maid's outfit, and she's sewing. Doug had designed an outsized sewing machine with the neon tube that may be my single favorite prop. There's lots of great
Art
props.
Deco streamline something, right?
Gorgeous, really gorgeous. And there's also an androgynous, or maybe more like hermaphrodite dress mannequin that takes center stage, which from different aspects has male or female kind of qualities to it, depending on how you turn it. And that's Me has returned from a shopping expedition, and then there's a little argument between V and Me about how much money Me has spent, and that turns into something else. So you want to say anything else about this before we go into this 10-minute clip?
Sure. Yeah. No. I mean, this is the shortest of the three acts, and is a short play on the page, of course, as well. I found it delightful upon even just very first read. There's an intimacy to it that I think strikes at a relationship between these two main figures, me and V, that struck me as really critical in the larger dramatic structure. But it's also in some ways the most operatic of the treatments here, of the treatments of the different plays. What you don't hear on the recording is that the string quartet and the pianist are generally speaking on stage for all of this. They're part of the action, and in Photograph they're guests who have been invited to help put on this parlor play. In Act 3, they're guests at the election night party. But in Act 2, they go off stage and they act like a well-behaved opera orchestra who have there's a little pit for them. At least there was in our first production, and I think that's important that we really have this relationship at center stage with its oddities and passive aggressions and its erotic charge as well.
Yes. All right. Well, let's listen to it. If you want to follow along with Stein's play, please click on the second link at the bottom of the YouTube page. It's Captain Walter Arnold, and Josh, you can go ahead and play that clip now.
I can explain how by twice repeating you change the meaning.
You actually change the meaning.
This makes it more interesting.
It makes it more interesting.
Dazzling dress, we dazzle together. If we attach it to a person, we will make a realization. Do you really mean you have no preference?
I cannot visualize this condition. I am free to say that.
We have made offers of finding the right name for everything.
Do you see the state of your purse?
Did you know that you are careful?
Have you been told that I will give you more if you ask for it?
Have you seen the state of your purse?
Do you not care to receive a favor? Certainly, you wish to be. Certainly, you wish to be helped.
Certainly, this is the way to play and 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 play away.
standard pieces. These are very, very standard pieces.
That was Act 2 from 6:20 Outrageous, 3 Gertrude Stein plays in the shape of an opera, Daniel Thomas Davis's chamber opera, based on plays by Gertrude Stein. And the last voice you heard was Ariadne Greif's. She was playing the character called 3. And you know, I remember it's in some early version of the libretto, Dan, I was thinking that this character was sort of the reader, that there was a position of the sort of person who was inside but also outside the text. And even though that kind of vanished a little bit in our eventual evolution, it kind of shows back up in this piece, I think.
I think that's right. I think that's absolutely right.
So, well, at this point, I thought it would be really good to involve as many others as possible, and to start the Q&A section of our episode. So I'm very happy to be welcoming Doug Fitch, who I see has joined the Zoom call. By the way, if anyone else wants to join the Zoom call, if you have questions or comments or observations about anything, you can just click on the link that's at the bottom of the YouTube page that you're listening to. But please do remember to lower the volume on your device when you join the Zoom call, because otherwise there'll be feedback between one and the next. So, Doug, are you there? He's connecting to audio, and I see that the connection to audio is taking some time. While we're sort of waiting for that, Dan.
Yes.
I wanted to mention that for those people who were reading along, there was a section, of course, that was not in the play, Captain Walter Arnold, but was in something called Plays, a portrait that Stein had wrote that I had initially included again in an earlier version of the libretto. But happy to be welcoming Doug Fitch. Oh. He has joined the Zoom call. By the way, if anyone else wants to join the Zoom call, about anything, we're having a few technical issues.
Oh no, I think that was wonderful.
That's nice.
In the spirit of 620 Outrageous, we have a pre-recorded version of our own voices playing back at us.
Exactly.
Mean, that was engineered, Adam, I am certain.
Thanks, Josh, for all that. Doug, are you there? Can you hear? And can you hear and can you say? Oh, we can't hear you. Oh, you're muted. You're actually muted. So if you can just
there
you go. Hello, Doug.
Doug.
I am not muted any longer. I think we're watching the YouTube and the Zoom call all at the same time. It's all very exciting. Is it okay? Can you hear me?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Oh, perfect. Yeah. Wow, it's been just incredible to be reliving.
For those people who were reading along, there was a section. Oh, maybe you could lower the volume on your computer, but not on your microphone. So just on your actual playback. Yeah, perfect.
Like that? Does that work?
I think so.
Okay. Looks like we've got the YouTube thing going on someplace. I'm very sorry.
No, that's okay. You can just close that window.
It's a show within a show.
Or yeah.
Terrific.
Technical issues.
So are you happy to be hearing back these things that you worked on from a while ago?
It's incredible. I mean, it really is incredible to remember this joyous project. It's one of those projects. Yeah, something strange is going on, and I apologize. It looked like there was a couple of windows open at the same time. How's that? Is that better?
Good. Yeah.
Oh, good. All right, so there we are. Thank you, technical staff. Tommy over here. Yeah. No, this is one of those projects that it's just incredible to remember, to be listening to it again and remembering how, it was kind of incredibly ambitious project and humble at the same time, I think is one way to describe it. And one of the things, because it was just a group of people, I didn't know most of these people. I knew a few of them before getting involved. Everybody got into a room and somehow just this magical thing kind of fell together in an incredibly short amount of time. And it was when we did it, we watched it and it felt like, wow, what actually happened? And one of the biggest things that I remember, and this is really such an, because of this incredible cast and momenta and the music as it was written, just taking something that seems to mean almost nothing. And with the decision to do it this way, you sit back and all the pieces come together and suddenly it's not about nothing, it's actually about everything. And it just becomes this profound little world that you can make your own connections in, and you sort of tell your own story, the story that makes the most sense to you, because of the way that you're drawn into the absurdity of it. And when the absurdity like that is presented to you, your mind has to make sense. And so it's working. So it's an invitation for the audience to really be incredibly involved in this piece. The music is so moving.
Well, it's funny because, Doug, you're reminding me of how you introduced it when we had those 3 live shows, which is you kind of come out from behind the couch, no one knows you're there, and you kind of almost do like a little clown thing, and then sort of say, well, you describe what we're up to, and then you say, we provide the words and you provide the meaning. Yeah. But then it's actually interesting. One of the reviewers said, thankfully, that's not entirely true.
Exactly. Right. I was very happy with that. And as the time went on, I realized I kept giving that speech, but it meant less and less that because in fact the story does come completely through, and people are crying. I was crying when this photograph song is happening, and this little boat is going by, and it's right in the middle of Dhaka, and we're seeing all these little drawings of immigrants that Tommy knew and I drew, and there's Tommy.
Hi, Tommy. Welcome.
It was a great project to work on.
Tommy also made so many of those costumes and part objects and that incredibly strange mannequin.
Excellent.
Multi-gendered mannequin. But yeah, I remember it being so timely. It was a way, I think, when the Dadaists were working with absurdity a long time ago, part of the reason was because absurdity made sense as a way to deal with the much larger absurdity that was going on in the time after war, and during the world, between the world wars. There was nothing made sense. And in our country for the last, since 2016, so little has made sense. And then this opera, which was using nonsense to make sense of it all, really managed to do precisely that.
Yeah, 1920 to 2020. I think it's maybe, maybe we should do our little centennial restaging of 6:20 Outrageous.
I mean, it's funny this, because there are a couple of things here. One, I was saying this to Adam throughout all this, that to me, Stein in a way is this kind of inkblot test, right? That you see and hear and smell and feel and taste what you want or need to at that particular moment in time. But that also makes me think about just the collaboration process more generally, and I think especially with Stein, but it's made me think about collaboration differently moving forward after making this thing, whatever it is. I think I had this naive idea of collaboration being something that people get together and they share a vision, and I think on some level what this suggests to me is like effective collaboration allows for sort of multiple visions at once, and that there's sort of space to be moving in different directions that are resonant with one another, and inform one another, but need not be in lockstep. And that I find really exciting, deeply exciting here.
Yes, Stein, I think that's exactly the kind of impulse behind trying to get numbers of people together to work on Stein's plays, because they afford exactly that kind of openness, but not complete infinity, anything. It's going to have to, there's going to be a hermeneutic. There's going to have to be a kind of a circle of interpretation. It's just there are numbers of circles of interpretation. There are wheels within wheels. And so they all seem to be happening simultaneously, and some of them going in different directions.
And I think there's a sort of deeply embedded like queer sensibility in that possibility, right? in the sort of resistance coded within within
a secret language.
Absolutely. Yep.
And you have to, and you're drawn in to understand what the words. You understand the words. It's just the way they're combined.
That's exactly it. It's not so much a secret language because like she means what she says and she says what she means, but we just don't know what that is.
That's exactly. You know, I use this metaphor a lot for projects which are collaborative, but in this one in particular, it's like it feels like a constellation. You know, all those words are out there, and what happens between the words when you add music is that it changes the meaning. The space between the words suddenly feels different. It feels wistful, or in the case of that photograph song, it feels hopeful. And then I remember when we realized that the whole the second song, what was it called? Arnold.
Captain Walter Arnold.
Captain Arnold was actually staged as these two women, one played by a man, falling and just basically flirting with each other on stage the whole time while the maid is watching while she's sewing, and they just tie themselves up in the big huge piece of fabric that was unfurled on the mannequin, and this half mannequin half womannequin, I don't know, but it was a wonderfully strange thing because they were saying one thing, doing something entirely else, and suddenly it really is like a constellation of parts. You see the pattern because you decide to see the pattern.
Right. Yeah, the constellation sort of sets off sparks too. It's like there's it's not a static constellation. It's even more complicated. It's like a moving constellation, right?
That's for sure. And it's made of stars. You got Ariadne up there and Adam. Just great.
Yeah.
Andrew.
Well, we're coming up, unfortunately, to the end of our hour. Dan, do you want to say any last remarks for this?
Well, you know what came to me, since there's been a lot of Stein in this series, of course, that's the point of it, is that we didn't touch on this text that's not a play at all, but is a play on the word play. That really is the cri de core of this show, I think. So I might actually throw that back at you, Adam. I don't know if you have it handy about playing every day and playing.
It's not to hand. It's a portrait. It's called Play. It's just called Play, and it's a portrait of the word play. If you could imagine Stein writing a portrait of a word, and it's play every day, play the play you play today, play it and play it. And it goes on in the way that Stein does to say the word play in as many possible ways as you can say it over the course of a page and a half. And we kind of dispersed it through the three plays as a way to remind ourselves and the audience that this was all happening in the form of play, not just theater, but play. And I think you're right to remind us of it and to kind of highlight it. Oddly enough, plays are portraits of playing, if you can put it that way. So maybe I'll leave it at that.
Let's play the play we played today, and
exactly.
We'll play it again.
Yes, let's definitely try to play it again.
So I just want words.
Yes. So I just want to let everyone know, again, it's the last episode of Radio Free Radio for now. I am thinking about a second edition or series, so I'll say more about that maybe in the new year if it comes to that. And meanwhile, I want to thank Dan very much, as well as all the other composers who I worked with on the Radio Free Stein project and everyone who participated in this. And thanks to you, Doug, for showing up, and to Josh, who's been the sound engineer throughout the 5 episodes. So thank you also for listening, and I'll sign off for now.
Thanks so much, Adam.
Thanks, Adam.
You're welcome. Josh